And greetings from Worcester, Ohio. It's super pleasing for me to be with you today. I hope your day is going well, and I hope your upcoming season goes well. Also, I'm a longtime fan of Utah State Extension, Utah State University Extension. Learned a lot through the great people that have been there and are still there. And I'm very, very confident that you're in terrific hands, with that team. And it's been a pleasure to work with them in preparation for the comments that I'll share with you here in the next 25 minutes or so. Let me share and hopefully get underway. So I hope you're seeing my slide deck at the moment. And if that is the case, somebody can give me a thumbs up and,
it looks good, Matt.
Okay, good. So I've been asked to kind of, if you will, defend the comment that you're seeing on the screen here. It's a position, as I guess it's a statement that I have put forth to you. And if you are familiar with high tunnel production, I would certainly like to hear from you about it. And of course, the comments that I'll share with you here in the next 25 minutes or so. But I am asserting that the success with high tunnel production is rooted in the management of the environments inside the tunnel. And in the comments that I'll share and pictures that I'll share, I hope to explain why I think that is true. But most importantly, if you were to agree with that, prepare you to be more effective at managing the environments inside your tunnel for your own success and under your own conditions. So get my answer going here. I would offer that high tunnels are risk mitigation tools. We tend to use them to even out, if you will, some of the risk and lower some of the risks that we encounter on a daily, hourly, seasonal basis. They help us diversify our operations. They help us intensify them and scale them up and maybe even make them more efficient. They offer a lot of positives for our farming operations. The products that are grown in high tunnels are available to people in nearly every type of outlet: direct marketing, wholesale, retail, farmers market, restaurant, CSAs, and so forth. If you're following this or you're involved in it, you're probably already well aware that high tunnel grown crops are available to nearly anyone at some level in any of these types of outlets. The four major components of any high tunnel systems are listed here. You obviously have a frame, a cover, very important irrigation system, and then of course the rooting medium. And it's almost like farming in a clear box, if you will, without the aid of active climate control systems. Usually, we do see some encroachment, if you will, or incorporation of active climate control in a high tunnel system, but it's still, I think, the norm. More typical to have no active climate control in one or more high tunnels that you might have on your property. And that's very important because when you stop to consider what that clear box is, subject to sitting there on the landscape, the sun shines or it doesn't, the wind blows or it doesn't, the clouds are present or they aren't, the ground is heating or cooling relative, warmer or cooler than the air around it, or the air is warmer or cooler than the air, than the soil. The soil inside the tunnel is at a different temperature than the soil outside the tunnel. So there's a constant exchange of energy. That's really what I want to emphasize here, is that there's a constant flow of energy into, through, and outside and out of the tunnel. And as a high tunnel grower, that's actually what you're managing. You're managing these fluxes of energy as created by the natural conditions around the tunnel, inside your tunnel, hopefully for your benefit. So no matter when you use your high tunnel, whether it's year round, primarily summer, primarily the shoulder seasons, fall and spring. So no matter when you use them, no matter what you grow in them, which of course can be a whole wide range of crops, edible, non-edible, and the like, and of course animals as well. No matter when you use the tunnel or tunnels, no matter what you're growing in them, I would offer that one of the basis of your success is knowing what leverage you have from the point of seeding or initiation of the crop cycle all the way through production. What is that? What are some of those roots of success? I would say that one of the most important ones that you have is, the knowledge base, what you know and what you're able to do with what you know. And as you know about levers, levers are force multipliers, and they allow us to do accomplish things that we would probably otherwise be unable to do. And just like a little bit of understanding, a little bit of awareness, a little bit of experience goes a long way if we apply it in a really effective way, right? So one perspective is that all that we have available to us as growers is on this screen. We have air, we have sunlight, we have water, we have things that we can take out of and make from materials in the Earth's crust. Excuse me. We have a photosynthetic organism, the plants, and then we have our knowledge base, our decision making. And all those together should result in something like the crops that you're seeing, and hopefully money, right? An income that allows you to continue the process. But I'm not sure if fundamentally, if there are any other major resources available to us besides the ones that you're seeing here. When you strip out everything else, that's what it comes down to. And ultimately, the plants that you've chosen and the decisions you make around how to manage them end up influencing your outcomes. So if that's the case, and I feel like it is, if that's the case, it's important to recognize what resources are available, how long those resources are available to us, and we have a fixed amount of time and sun and water, nutrients, and every other thing that we have, and anything that interferes with the most effective use of those resources is kind of working against us, right? So perhaps useful to consider that chief among those relationships or those factors are light temperature relationships, because these really drive the productivity of much of the productivity of our operation when it's plant-based, right? Because again, usually crops are at the cornerstone or at the foundation of our high tunnel based business, and they are strongly affected by light temperature relationships. And unless you're going to invest mightily in active, supplemental lighting and active supplemental heating to maintain ideal light temperature relationships at all times, unless you're going to make that kind of investment, which is typical of the most advanced, if you will, climate control greenhouses, you're going to rely on the natural photo period of your location. One thing we talk about climate change, and there's a lot to say there. One thing that is not changing is the day length, right? And so the sunrise and the sunset for probably every day of your life, if you would like to look it up, such as the Naval Observatory, you can get those dates, you get those times for any day of the year, any year going forward. They're very predictable. So you're going to be operating with a certain amount of light. You're also going to be operating with the typical temperature patterns for your location at any point in time. Obviously, there are averages are just those, they're averages, but you could kind of be aware of what the typical temperature profiles of your location are, and align those up with or overlap them with the light profiles, and you'll be more aware of what your resource bank is for this arrangement, even before you've sown a seed. Now, if you have that information in hand, consider the possibility that there are two types of races. The first one is the most common. We say run 1,500 meters, run 100 yards, run a 40-yard dash if you're trying out for the NFL Combine. How much time does it take you to cover that distance? That's one type of race that's probably the most common. But I would argue that farmers are actually involved in the second one. There's a fixed amount of time. How far do you go is the big question, right? So with all the resources available to you, the days between frosts, the photo period during those times, the amount of the time at the proper growing temperatures, all the conditions. How far do you go with the resources that you have, the most precious one being time in this case? So if you put that together, you say, okay, I've got the external weather, I've got the ventilation status of my high tunnel plus the other practices. We're going to get into those. Those two together influence the conditions near my crop. And what is my crop exactly? What crop, what is it? What family is it? What is it? Is it a brassica or is it a solanaceous crop, for example? What variety is it? Is it well suited to be in the high tunnel? That kind of flow chart, that kind of equation, if you will, ends up determining your cropping outcomes. Like it was a successful cycle, or maybe a not so successful. Why is that? And if you remember, if you have notes or if you have any sort of information recorded, you can go back and ask, well, what would I have done differently? What might I need to change to have a better outcome next time? Do I need to change my management? Do I need to change my crop genetics? What do I need to alter in order to have a better outcome? So the environment specifically, which is what I'm here to talk about, the environment inside a high tunnel is critical to your success, and knowing how it is helping or perhaps holding you back from the fullest possible success that you have is very, very important. And of course, there's if you've been in high tunnel production for any length of time, you probably learned, or if you're starting now, you're probably having to do on-the-job learning of how to manage those environments to get the outcomes that you're looking for. That's kind of unfortunate because we really don't have any recipe for it as extension folks. We can't prescribe or create a formula or offer some sort of really thorough do-it-yourself management or how-to guide. But we're chipping away at it, and I hope you see evidence of that going forward. So in the absence of these recipes, formulas, or specific guides, what do you rely on? Probably best to rely on the tools, the principles, the resources that you have available, and whatever weighted, what are good, reliable observations that you have made and others have made and are sharing with you, like I'm going to try to do here. Where and ask where the trend line is going. Okay, so again, whenever you're using the tunnel, there's outside weather, whatever season that is. There are 5 general areas in which you can have a really significant impact, 5 general ways in which you can have a very significant impact on the environment inside the tunnel. I'll go through these 5, and I will probably spend the majority of the time on the 4th and 5th ones, heating and ventilation status. We'll cover films and covers and fans, but I'll do so somewhat quickly. By now, you may have seen that I tend to use a lot of slides. I go through them fairly quickly. I'd like to just mention that, of course, this is being recorded. Of course, you can follow up with me if you have a question that isn't addressed today. And also, when you're looking at the slides as I go through them, keep in mind that they're there mainly to reinforce, I hope, or illustrate what I'm saying. So best to hear what I'm saying and use the visual to help kind of reinforce that. Don't try to study it because I may not be around long enough to do that. So anyway, with our films, there is a film, and perhaps you're aware of it, that actually allows the temperature inside the tunnel to be 2 to 3 degrees cooler than outside the tunnel, which is unexpected based on everyone's experiences with other films or standard films, which are where the opposite would be true. It's typically warmer inside the tunnel than it is outside. So it's gone by different trade names, but we tested it, and we did show fairly clearly that this film, because of the additives that are in it, can reduce the amount of infrared energy coming through the tunnel and ultraviolet that create warmth and keep the tunnel somewhat cooler than the outside. So this is something, if that's something that's very important to you, you could look it up and find a local supplier. Covers are another way. As you know, you can whitewash the tunnel, if you will, providing essentially shade. That can be in a spray-on form. That can be in the form of shade cloth with different weaves or weights, if you will, and coming in different colors and different types to, again, limit the amount of light that's coming through. So it's not uncommon. It probably is, I would expect it to be somewhat common in Utah to have shade cloth on at least some tunnels at some part of the year. The anodized film, if you will, or cloth, the reflective cloth tends to be even more effective yet because it's reflecting light away from the tunnel even before it enters, preventing it from entering. So it also has a larger effect than just the standard shade cloth. And of course, depending on what we're growing and the needs of that crop, we might have a shaded tunnel and a non-shaded tunnel. We're trying to create environments for our crops that work for them very well, and then of course end up working for us in the meantime. So factors to consider when using these materials are listed here. Which crops are you growing? Do you need to cool them, warm them? Do you need both? What are the responses to light temperature relationships that you'd be creating? What happens at different crop stages? How much shading is needed, or how much shade do you need to apply to get the desired effect? When do you put it on, when do you take it off, that sort of thing. And it can impact can actually impact the plastic itself, I don't want to say prematurely aging it, but there's a contact effect, if you will. Fans, just a moment on this, with or without misting. We always like to see air movement in the tunnel. That's often accomplished with what we'd call horizontal airflow fans, something you can pick up at a big box store or ag supply store, mounting, say, 2 or 3 down the length of the tunnel, blowing one direction, and another row going on the other side of the tunnel, going the opposite direction to create a vortex or a rotation of that air around the tunnel, with each fan angled just a few degrees down. So it is also mixing top to bottom air as well as it does that. So if electric is available at the tunnel, the inclusion of fans in it can be a real asset. With or without misting, and a misting it kind of cuts both ways. Of course, evaporative loss, evaporation creates cooling. At the same time, it creates leaf wetness that may be undesirable from a plant pathology point of view, so a plant disease point of view. So misting has to be done very carefully, perhaps very selectively, but it can be effective at reducing at least the plant tissue temperature. Creating a fog might be nice and it can work, but again, maybe this might be a certain pathologist's dream when they look at this. So it just has to be approached very carefully and very mindfully to make sure that the benefits outweigh the potential risks of it. So heating, including heating of the root zone. We often want to cool the tunnel, which makes a lot of sense, but what about heating the tunnel? Lots of different approaches used for this. And each of these 5 methods, by the way, going back here, each of these 5 methods, we could spend, clearly spend 30 minutes alone on each of them in their own right. So what you're getting here is a bit of a flyover of the 5, and hope to provide you with maybe some information, actionable information that you can use to mix and match as you might see fit. So we're often thinking about cooling the tunnel in the summertime, but we also might want to heat it at other times of the year, and lots of different approaches are used for that. This is an emergency short-term approach that I have tested, thanks to the prompting by a grower. This is essentially sterno, and it has, if you're familiar with that, it produces a tremendous amount of BTUs, number of BTUs, but obviously it's a flame, and in a high tunnel that is covered with exceptionally flammable plastic, one has to keep that in mind if they were to use it. This is not something that would be used over and over again. This is perhaps, like I say here, an emergency when the primary system is not functioning, or you don't have any system, but you are, if you will, driven to or feeling this profound need to keep the tunnel a few degrees warmer than it otherwise would be. So what do we want to heat, the air or the soil? That's often a question we get in this area anyway. And I don't think it's been settled, to be quite honest. I think there's still active debate around it, and maybe some of the data that I'll show you will help explain some of that. not very many reports on soil heating within high tunnels. I think it's regional. There may be some regional aspects to this. And what we're simply trying to achieve is having the temperatures at their optimal levels as often as possible. Again, it's that time factor, remember? How often are our crops at their optimal temperature light conditions during the potential growth cycle? That determines, in many respects, that determines the level of success with that particular cropping cycle. I went to grower conferences primarily east of the Mississippi, but not only. And I was looking for references to soil heating, and I found very, very few of them. Just a few mentioned, and this is a process I'll go through again here pretty soon. But I did cooperate with some growers in Ohio some years ago on soil heating work, and some of those growers were soil heating user experts, if you will. They were teaching me far more than I could ever be teaching them, but we were running parallel studies here in Worcester and along with them. So they made excellent use of soil heating and preferred it over air heating for lots of different reasons. So one of the experiments we did, and I'll just go through this quickly, not in one of our high tunnels with raised beds, and we used electric heating cables in this case. We subjected some of these beds to the treatments all of the beds to the treatments that you're seeing listed here. And what you should notice is that there's a combination of heating the soil actively with those electric heating cables versus passively just by capturing the solar energy that was available during this fall to spring period, trapping it with blankets overnight, row covers overnight, and maybe creating a so-called greenhouse effect, mini greenhouse effect with the perforated film during the day. All around. And lettuce is an example of a crop that is very responsive to these different treatments. So you see 2 and 4, what you're seeing is partial effects of soil heating, with 4 also having retention of the built-up heat, if you will, during the nighttime, thanks to the row cover. And with number 1, you're seeing virtually no intervention, just lettuce grown in a high tunnel, no low tunnel with perforated film, no row cover, no soil heating. So if you have been utilizing your tunnel in one way, if you will, and have not experimented with something like soil heating, perforated films, row covers, and the like, if you've not experimented with them, what you could be seeing is just one of these panels, if you will. That is your typical experience, and you may or may not appreciate the potential differences that would be created by using another tactic. And this is the same experiment, and here are the carrots that were produced in that particular experiment. And overall, what we're showing in this simple plot for carrot and lettuce is that if you rank order those treatments from high to low, number 1 being the highest, in terms of their productivity, you see the treatment 4 across the board. This is using a cable during the day, row cover at night, perforated film over the beds, was the most productive, as kind of borne out by the pictures. Does that mean you should automatically invest in soil heating? Absolutely not. What it might mean is that you may want to experiment with it, with Milena, with somebody else, to understand its possible role in your operation. Okay. The final step here that I'll mention is ventilation status. Ventilation status, as you know, is kind of the level, how open is the tunnel? And by open, are the doors open, the vents open, the sidewalls open? How open are they? Okay. Compared to being fully closed. All right. And again, go back to this diagram. The energy is always flowing into and away from the tunnel in one shape or one way or another. And it's your job as the grower managing that tunnel to position the ventilation status, the sidewalls, the doors, maybe the fence, in such a way that is most beneficial to you. If you don't do that, the worst case scenario is that you actually damage your tunnel, maybe even the crops, but certainly you could damage the tunnel. It's major aggravation. It's another expense. It's possibly lost time. It's a real setback, right? but that's hopefully very, very rare. What's more likely to happen when you consider the role of these factors, plus the ventilation status that you have in your tunnel, on your tunnel, with your tunnel at any one time, what's more likely to happen is you're going to affect your cropping outcomes. So that's why we're talking about it, because it affects the environments inside your tunnel. How warm are they? How much affected by the wind are they? How humid are they, right? So if we look at the doors and sidewalls, that's the most common way to influence the ventilation status, but you could also have end wall vents. And I'm sure, these are very, very familiar pictures to you, and how people, the design of tunnels allow you to do that. Ridge vents along the entire length of the tunnel, very popular, but also expensive. We started to use what we call knee walls here in Ohio, and this is a typical Ohio winter day. Notice the grayness, okay? But knee wall, we learned that we sometimes want to ventilate during the cold periods. It actually would get too warm, or possibly too humid. But we have roll up to open sidewalls, and we didn't want that cold air to come in right at ground level, right over the baseboard. So we installed a row of wiggle wire track about halfway up on the bows, and another one at the baseboard. And in the fall, we attach some plastic to that location. So when we roll up the sidewall, it has to clear that knee wall in order for any ventilation to occur. And when it does, we can meter it much more effectively. So it kind of comes in and mixes more effectively than if it would just come in right across the soil line, if you will. And these knee walls are very simple, fast, cheap and effective. They work for us really nicely. Again, ridge vents and the like. This picture was taken in Kenya, and I have others from East Africa where they use very innovative uses of wiggle wire, one of mankind's best inventions. They have a rainy season and a dry season, and they can swap out the actual size and covers and maybe even parts of the roofs of their high tunnel according to the season to help with the ventilation challenges, right? So one time the whole sidewall can be plastic, and another time it can be screening, same way with the part of the end wall that you're seeing here. So really, really clever uses of that. So again, ventilation status is how open is the tunnel. These are the factors that must be taken into account when selecting a ventilation status. Complicated affair, if you will. My own opinion is that the effects of those ventilation status are far greater than what we know about how growers tend to manage them. So there's a big disconnect there. Probably one of the least well-studied aspects of high tunnel production relative to its importance. So my place, where we have 10 tunnels total, but 9 that are used more or less constantly, some are oriented north-south, some east-west. We were fortunate to get a little bit of funding from our Department of Agriculture to ask, what is the role of ventilation status exactly in setting the conditions inside the tunnel? If you do the math, you see that there are 625 possible combinations of 2 sidewalls and 2 doors. If you think that they can be open, none, not at all, 25%, 50%, 75%, or 100%, 5 statuses for each sidewall and each door gives you literally 625 possible combinations. And the color chart here is all the ones that we have tried so far. So we're down to like 3 or 4 open ones that we have not yet tried to this point. But what I'm going to show you here are some graphs. Just take them in quickly before I wrap up. We can manipulate the conditions inside any one of these tunnels with the ventilation status, and show, like we're showing here, that under the same weather, one can have a fairly dramatic difference in temperatures and relative humidities in those tunnels. And when growers come out to visit us, who typically have one tunnel, and they use whatever approach they use to set their ventilation status, they're amazed at how they can walk from one tunnel to another one in 10 seconds. And it's an entirely different feel inside that tunnel, and it's the same weather outside. And the only thing different was a 25% difference in one of the sidewall positions, or two sidewall positions, or one door being open or closed. You get a different environment inside the tunnel. And if you're monitoring your outside temperatures and light and wind and all that, and you want to keep or achieve and keep certain conditions inside the tunnel, it's nearly, I would say, it's essential to know what the effect of the ventilation status that you would be using could be. So we have cataloged all this at our website. You can search it and follow it. We have the reports of this nonstop. You can watch our tunnels and the conditions in them and the ventilation statuses. And then in the other resource, you can search them to ask, what might it be true in my place? So what we're trying to do is help people make and implement better decisions. And I know I'm out of time, but I will focus on just 1 second, saying that it's one thing to know what the ventilation status should be. It's quite another to actually be able to implement it. So we developed a system that is solar powered to allow growers to control the sidewall positions from their handheld device from wherever they are on the planet that they have network access. So one does not need to be at the tunnel to change the position of their sidewalls. And the feedback's been very positive and very enthusiastic. People are very enthusiastic about it, and I'd be happy to talk more about it. So as I wrap up, and I apologize for going a minute over, we've talked about crops a lot in this case, and that's very, very important. But I will remind you that environmental management is a pillar of integrated crop or integrated pest management. So we have additional incentive to manage the environments inside the tunnel, not only for productivity purposes, outright productivity, but also to avoid or mitigate or lessen or delay the onset of disease and other problems that might create issues for us. So I appreciate your time, appreciate your attention. I hope these comments were useful. Please do get a hold of me if I can be of service in any way. But if there is time, I will be happy to address questions. If there isn't, I understand, and look forward to hearing more about your success.